Shabbos Daf Ayin Daled. Within the 39 malachas, 3 of them are one and the same. Zoira, winnowing; Boirer, selecting; Merakit, sifting. They accomplish the same thing. You're separating the good from the bad. Yet, since they are 3 necessary processes in the making of bread, the Mishnah brings them down to tell us that if one were to do all 3 in one awareness, you were to bring 3 separate korbanos. Koitesh, pounding, should be another malacha. It's something that necessary to make bread. Says Abaya, but since poor people skip that process, the Mishnah skips it as well. It's not one of them. Don't tell me that it's because there are only 39 malachas and Kodesh would be the 40th, because since we have 3 separating malachas, you can take one of those 3, take it out of the Mishnah, and put Kodesh in instead. The Gemara brings a brisa that's a riddle. And there are 5 attempts to solve the riddle, but what we could take out from those 5 attempts are 3 major halachas regarding boirer on Shabbos. You could do boirer on Shabbos if it's oichal matech p'soilos, if it's food from within the waste and not the waste from the food. And if you do it biyad, with your hand and not a kli, and if you do it la'alter, for immediate consumption and not for even that day Shabbos, but later on. What are the 5 attempts? The first attempt was, the brisa says that if you have food in front of you and you could do boirer and eat it, you could do boirer and give it to your friend, and then the brisa does a 180. You cannot do boirer, and if you do boirer, you have to bring a chatos. Perhaps the Reish is talking about for that day, and that's mutter, but if you do it for Sunday, that's a chiyuv chatos. The Gemara says that can't be. There is no malacha that you could cook on Shabbos, but you can't cook for Sunday. Perhaps the brisa is talking about a half a shear. If you do a half a boirer, half the amount, that's okay. But if you do the full amount, that's a chiyuv chatos. Chatzi shir also min haTorah, the Gemara says, it's impossible. There is no melacha that you could do a half of it. Even a half would be also min haTorah. You just don't get a punishment. Perhaps the brisa is saying that you're allowed to do it with your hand, but if you do it with kanon v'tamchoy, that's only isur d'Rabbanan, with a funnel or with a plate. That's kila achar yad. That's not the real way of doing boirer. But if you do it the real way with a real sifter, a napo kvara, that's the isur d'Oraisa. The Gemara says, but it doesn't say anything, any mention of kalim in that brisa. Perhaps it's talking about oichal metoich psoilos, and that's mutter. But psoilos metoich oichal is aser. Again, the brisa doesn't mention anything about oichal metoich psoilos. Says Abaye, therefore I say the pshat is la'alter. It says in the brisa that you eat it, meaning immediately. If you eat it immediately, that's okay. But if you do it for later on during the day, that's a isur boirer d'oraisa. The Rishonim explain that Abaye agrees to the concept of biyad and oichal metoich psoilos. He just adds that you need also miyad right away. The Gemara tells a story. Rabbi Bibi threw a whole box of fruit that included different leaves and psoilos on the table in front of Rav Ami and Rav Asi. And Rav Dimi saw this and he wasn't sure if it was because Rav Bibi held that even oichal metoich psoilos is asur, and therefore he spread it on the table that there shouldn't be a problem of boirer. It just selected itself. You just grab an apple. Or perhaps he wanted to show a ayin yafa. He wanted to show that he's large. He threw all the fruit on the table. Chizkiah says that turmasin, type of bean, is considered psoilos metoich oichal, even if you take out the actual food, because it requires 7 cookings. And even after 2 or 3 times, if you don't remove the oichal, the actual bean, it turns into psoilos. It can ruin other beans. And now we go to Amud Beis. The Gemara tells us halacha, not in boirer. Now we're done with boirer. If somebody takes a beet and chops it up really, really thin, he minces it, that is considered toichen, grinding. Machlokes Rishonim, if it applies to all vegetables. If you were to take a piece of wood and saw it and create sawdust, that is also toichen, grinding. Rav Ashi says if a person is careful about the size of the wood, he will be over a mechatich. Like in the Mishnah, if you cut leather to a certain size, it's mechatich, cutting. The Gemara asks, why does the Tana talk about afiyah, baking, when in the Mishkan there was no baking, there was cooking samamonim? Says the Gemara, because that's what people are used to. They're familiar with the process of baking, and therefore the Mishnah spoke about baking. You're over on the isra of mevashel, even on non-food items, such as wood, pegs. If a person takes a peg and puts it in the oven, since it first softens it up like bishul, it extracts the moisture and then hardens it up, that's bishul. You'd also be over on bishul if you take tar, which is hard, soften it up. Even though later on it becomes just as hard as it started out with, it's still considered bishul because you softened it up. If you take, the Gemara says it's possible, it's a riddle. How do I get to 7 different malachas if I make a barrel made out of earthenware? Says the Gemara, it's possible to be over on teichen, the dirt, boirer, the dirt, merakid, you sift out the dirt, lush, you knead the dirt, memachik, you smooth it all out, you light the fire of the oven, and then you're mevashel it. If you were to make a real oven out of earthenware, you'd be over on one more called makeh b'patish, whereas a barrel doesn't have makeh b'patish because it happens by itself in the oven. There is no baina, says Rashi, because there's no binyan v'stira when it comes to kalim. If one were to make a basket out of reeds, you could be over on 11 different averas. How? You have to plant the reed, you have to reap the reed, you have to gather the reed, you have to select it, you have to smooth it out, you have to grind it, you have to cut it, you have to start it on a reel, mesach, you do shtei batinirim, you start it out in the 2 loops, oireg, you put the reeds together, and makeh b'patish. And if you were to bend over the top and make a lip for it, you could be over also on teifer, on sewing, and kosher, making a knot. If you were to do tviyah, spin the wool of an animal while it's still attached to the animal, machloikas. According to Rabbi Bachani, it could be over on 3 things. Geizes, minapitz, untangling it, and tviyah, spinning. Rav Kahana says, but since it's on the animal is alive, or it's still on the animal, that's not the way to do it, and therefore you're not over, and that's klachiyat, you're not over. Even though in the Mishkan you had women that did the tviyah, they spun it on the animal while the animal was alive, that's chachama, it has special chachma, but today it's considered kilachar yad. If one were to pluck a feather from a bird, you're over on geizes. If you cut it specifically on the top, you're over on mechatech, and if you pull off the feathers, the small feathers, off the stem, you're over on memachek, smoothing it out. Where was there knots in the Mishkan? The folks who were trapping the chilazon to make tchelas, they used nets, and they would add to the net and take off from the net, so they made kshiras, and they made knots, and they would undo the knots. Now, you can't say that the pshat is that there were 2 knots in 2 threads in the Mishkan, and you undid one, because even for a regular king, you wouldn't do so certainly not for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Teifer, sewing, means 1 in, 1 out. In other words, 1 full stitch. It doesn't come apart because you make a knot on it. Have a wonderful day.